Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you both mentally and physically become the best version of you. I have just come off the back of recording this podcast with a gentleman called Robbie Kramer. And I'm going to be completely honest, I did not know what to expect when we first started this interview. But as soon as I had a conversation with him off air, I knew that it was going to be an incredible conversation. So today, Robbie is going to be talking about dating from a male point of view, a male perspective. But I know my main demographic listening to this podcast is women, but I don't want to be put off by this because the way that me and Robbie construct this conversation, there's absolute golden nuggets here when it comes to building rapport and just how to navigate the dating scene, whether you are a male or a female. It's a fantastic conversation. So my guest today, again, Robbie Kramer, has been guiding men to accomplishing their goals with women, health, fitness and careers since 2008. He founded Inner Confidence to show men exactly how to create the lifestyle of their dreams in a way that actually works. And he's also got his own podcast called The Leverage Podcast. I think you're going to really, really enjoy this episode. It's really laid back. The conversation just absolutely flowed, and I think he's definitely going to have to come back on so we can deep dive some of these topics because, again, I'm always respectful of the guest's time. Like I said, we normally allocate a podcast time, but this conversation literally flew. When it talks about building rapport and stuff like that, it genuinely just absolutely flew. I almost lost track of the time, but fantastic conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest, Robbie Kramer.
Good. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
No, honestly, absolute pleasure. Like, I've had a really good conversation off air. And like I said, I think we've got a lot of stuff in common when it comes to your personal life. Like, obviously, your mission is now to basically help men with women and their health and fitness and all that sorts of careers. Like, you've got a vast array of experience actually helping men actually basically become the best version of themselves. Essentially, I think you'd kind of describe it. But I'm really interested into what actually got you into this space, because it's a very sort of niche space that you're in. So can you paint a picture for my audience of younger Robbie and like what kind of got you into this space?
Sure. So I was about to graduate from university, 22 years old. My dream was to become a professional golfer on the PGA Tour. I got pretty good, pretty close, but didn't quite cut it. And I, basically graduated and I got my first job. And what changed when I got that job was, you go from like being in a university setting, kind of like going to parties, meeting women in classes or through your friend group, through the golf team, through your buddies in the frat, and all these social outlets. And then you go into the work world and you're just like, what's going on here? I'm at an office from, 9 till 9 p.m. I was working in an investment bank, so super long hours. And it was just such a lifestyle, just weird situation for me. And then this whole idea of like going on a date, I'd never actually been on a real date. And I'm like, what is that? Like, do most guys go on dates? But it's this thing that you're supposed to kind of just understand, I guess. I never had anyone to kind of like teach me that. And it was just this weird situation where I was like, well, how do I meet women now? Because I had just gotten out of a relationship. I was kind of always that guy. It's like the dorky golf kid, going through high school and college. And I, just happened to have a couple long-term girlfriends in that time. But when I found myself single in the career world, having no idea what to do, I was just kind of stumped. I went on a couple dates and they were just awkward, long dinner dates, forced conversation, weird. When do you go for the kiss? I had all these questions in my mind that I actually didn't know I had until a buddy of mine, he was like, hey, you should read this crazy book. It's about these guys who are trying to go out and pick up women. I'm like, that sounds weird. And I don't need that. That's strange. And then I read this book and it was called The Game. If, a lot of people have read it back in the day, and it kind of took me down this crazy rabbit hole. And, there were all these weird guys teaching these weird techniques. And it was just so fascinating to me because I never realized that you could actually improve yourself as a man. I never realized you could improve your confidence. I always just thought you kind of had it. It was this buzzword in my head, like, oh, you got to be, I knew people said you got to be confident, but I always just thought it was about looks. I always thought women were going to be attracted to me based on how I looked. And that's because that's what I thought I was attracted to them by. Right. And I was a bit overweight at the time, probably about 30 to 45 pounds heavier than I am now, 5'10" or 180 centimeters and, probably 100 kilos at the time. So not like huge, but I had insecurities about that. And I was just, I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel worthy of the women I was attracted to. So once I realized that you actually could improve your confidence, you could improve your social skills, you could take steps to, become a better version of you. I just became obsessed with it. And I became one of these like seminar junkies. I would go to, these different personal growth event, workshops and boot camps. I went to this thing called Landmark Education, which some people think is a cult. I did all this transformational work. Most of it was, I think, kind of, quick fixes, kind of like magic pills type of stuff. And I did that for a long time, probably like 4 or 5 years. And then eventually I started to do the hard work to actually make the changes, which was confronting my fear of rejection, which was getting over sort of the issues I had around my physique and my body, and doing the work to lose weight. And that's when the real transformation came, when I actually kind of like put my butt on the line and started making the difficult changes instead of just talking about it. So after, it was a good timing, because that journey for the few years that I was on it coincided with the banking collapse of 2008. Yep. So I started a blog of my journey, and this is back when like Blogspot was a thing and no one was really doing blogs, and the idea of being a blogger was just like something you do on the side as a joke.
Yeah.
But luckily, like right before the markets crash, I had a few guys that were following my blog, and they're like, "Hey, would you coach me? You seem like you kind of know what you're doing, and we've been following your blog. Can we pay you for dating advice?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So my sort of just like my own personal journey turned into a business without me really trying to make it into that. And then when the banking sector collapsed, I found myself like, okay, do I go back in finance and try to get a new job that I hate, doing a 9 to 5, or do I pursue this coaching career? And so I just kind of made it work, and I'm really glad I did, because it really is my passion now to help other guys kind of go through this journey of improving themselves and learning really how attraction works. There's a lot of things that guys don't understand about, going on dates and how women think masculine versus feminine energy. It's just a big area of misunderstanding, I feel. And if you know what you're doing, it's really not that hard at all. Like we were talking about off the air, right? Once you kind of get it, it becomes really easy. And meeting people.
Isn't this the thing though? Like, did you find a lot of your stuff when you first started doing this was from like men's health magazines? Because I remember when I first started dating, for me, I was just reading stuff in the men's health magazines and just thinking, oh, well, this is how you date. This, like you said here, do you like the magic pill stuff? Oh, you've got to say these things, or you've got to do this. And it's almost like you become a robot. And by becoming a robot, you basically do the exact opposite thing of what you're trying to do, which is exude confidence, because you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, if I don't look this way, or if I say the wrong thing, then she's going to think I'm stupid. And you basically end up becoming less attractive through no fault of your own, because these mainstream tabloids are like, this is what girls want. This is this is this. And you've got to have 6-pack abs and shredded. And I said this on my podcast when I spoke about like my sex addiction, was the fact that when I was at my most shredded, 6-pack shredded, stepping on stage, doing all this fitness modeling, that's when girls found me the least attractive, because they said I was too hard. Like when they tried to cuddle me, I was too hard. I was taking things too seriously. That I wasn't any fun because I was always dieting or always at the gym. But actually, when I let myself get a little bit more fluffy, like a rugby player build, that is when women were more attracted to me, which is the exact opposite of what every single magazine will tell you. It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. That, it's very counterintuitive, but women respond to that different energy. Like, and when you're maybe like fluffier, of course, you're probably putting out a different vibe. They feel like they can connect with you easier, form that bond with you easier, maybe a little bit more approachable, a little bit more, obviously still masculine and attractive, but maybe slightly more teddy bear, and who knows, right? But it's totally true. And that's the same sort of stuff I found with all that horrible pickup advice, that I started with, was it took me further away from kind of like, they say be yourself, but if you're just trying to be yourself, usually what that means is you're walking around with a bunch of anxiety and not sure what to say. And so that advice doesn't work. Also, it doesn't work to try to become like a seducer or a pickup artist or any of this nonsense. That gets you even further away, because then you're just rehearsing lines and you're coming off totally canned and fake, and women can smell that from a mile away. So what I found was you kind of need to find a balance between that. You need to work on yourself from the inside, get over your fear of rejection, like I was talking about. And then there are some things that are very important to know. There's some ways to kind of like patterns to follow about how people connect, conversations, how those things kind of naturally evolve. There's a theory behind texting and attraction and all those things. And if you know like the roadmap and you have some basic pillars to follow, I think most guys, especially who are more of like an engineering mindset, that's most of the guys I work with are typically more analytical. So having some sort of structure to how they're doing something can make a huge difference. And that's what really made it for me was kind of knowing where I was in an interaction versus just kind of winging it, which gave me a lot of confidence to then show up on a date and know where I was going to take her, know some of the things that I thought were good conversation pieces. And that's what I find is very helpful for most of the guys, is they need those sort of starting points and those check marks.
It's like for me, and with some of my clients or working with their mental health, it's like you're just like the guide. Like they're the star. They've got to actually go and do the work, but you're basically saying, right, here's a few little things to look out for. Like you want to avoid these rocks over here. You want to, like, if this happens, then, and again, it's that ultimate unknown, as you said, especially when you get really, really nice guys, like engineers, people that are a lot more introvert. They're genuinely super, super nice guys, and they've got a lot to offer. But if you can't present that to the opposite sex, like it's no good. And it's a case of, as you said, just give someone a slight sort of roadmap and it will massively help. But I think one of the biggest things you've hit on, which I want to sort of loop back on here, is basically the improving the confidence bit. And by doing that, you've got to do the hard work, as you called it, which again is one of the biggest things I talk about on my podcast. Is the hardest thing to do is actually to get to know yourself. Because once you actually know yourself and you know your insecurities, it's almost like Eminem in that 8 Mile, where it's like, if you know all your insecurities, no one can touch you. There's nothing that a woman can say. There's nothing any sort of rejection can do to you, because like you already know, you've already done the work, and it almost like puts your suit of armor on for you. So how do you start to unpick this for people? How do you start to look at what guys' potential weaknesses are when it comes to self-confidence?
So the cool thing is most guys have the same exact problem. And especially if they're more introverted, more shy, kind of that nice guy, and I put it in air quotes because the whole like nice guy game or persona, they're not actually nice guys. They're just trying to be nice because that's what they think is going to lead them to a connection in the bedroom, right? That's the only way I knew how to try to, get with a woman was, I can just be nice to her, bring extra copies of my homework, when I was in high school, and hopefully she'll see me as a good guy and then she'll want to sleep with me. Unfortunately, that strategy doesn't usually work. So when I say nice guy, you're not, like I said, it's an inauthentic nice guy. So what I tell my clients is, first, if you have any sort of shame or embarrassment around your attraction to women, that is going to be a major sort of roadblock. And that was really the thing for me, is I was actually embarrassed when a girl knew that I was attracted to her. And the way that kind of manifested was, if I tried to make eye contact with a beautiful girl who I found intimidating, I would break eye contact first. I couldn't hold that sexual tension. Like I was running away from that tension rather than stepping into it, which is what you see confident men do. Confident men will feel that tension and they'll be comfortable in the tension. And then the woman will feel, ooh, this guy's comfortable in that. And it'll turn her on. And that's kind of where Hollywood does an amazing job of depicting that, right? Through the eye contact. Like if you just watch movies, Hollywood nails this stuff. And if you're watching those movies as a guy and those scenes are making you a little bit uncomfortable, that's how you know, like, oh, I should probably do some work on this. Or if you see a beautiful woman and you always break eye contact first, that's how you kind of know. Or if, you grew up and you were embarrassed about them knowing that you like them, then that's the work you need to do. And the only way, and really what all that is, it's just a fear of rejection, right? Because if she rejects you, that means that you're not worthy and all this other story and mumbo jumbo in your head. And you end up not taking the risk because you don't want that story to be true, right? I wouldn't approach the women I was really attracted to because I was like, well, if they reject me, that means I'm, I would have to look myself in the mirror. But if I don't approach those women, and if I just date women that I can kind of settle for, then I don't really have to ever look in that mirror. And so that's what I was always kind of doing. I was just kind of dating women that I didn't find, they weren't like the ones I really wanted. And I would stay in these relationships sometimes for way longer than I should, which is unhealthy for me, unhealthy for them. It's just terrible for everyone involved. So for me, it was really just a series of exercises to break through those insecurities. So one thing I did was the eye contact thing. I made a conscious effort to maintain eye contact with strangers, right? It can get a little with women. It's obviously like there's not like when it comes to eye contact, like if you look at dogs or if you look at like just animals, right? It's either we're going to fight or we're going to F, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of those two things, right? And so with a woman, you're not going to fight, of course. So there's no risk. But if you hold eye contact with a guy on the street for too long, he's going to be like, so the simple, like, head nod, if it gets that second, millisecond too long, is kind of what I would do if it got too tense. But that really allowed me to get more comfortable with eye contact. And then I did a bunch of social freedom exercises, is what I call them, to get comfortable with just being out in public and looking stupid, looking weird, getting potentially rejected. So one thing I did that was really helpful is I would just find a busy sidewalk and I just lay down on the sidewalk until I couldn't take the tension anymore of like people standing around, be like, are you okay? Do we need to call an ambulance? Right. If you do it and you're even lying down for 10 or 15 seconds, it'll feel like an eternity. If you can stay there for 30 seconds to a minute, that's, that probably will feel pretty weird. And then there's way more stuff you could do. You can go to McDonald's and ask for a discount. You can ask to buy the store, walk in there. And so, I've got a whole series of these social freedom exercises, and eventually you can work your way up to straight up, even approaching women and telling like, hey, I saw you and I had to risk embarrassing the hell out of myself to come meet you. And you can try to parlay that into a little conversation. A great little elevator pitch. I find this is super helpful for most of the guys that see my content or hear me on podcasts. Is I like to give guys like an elevator pitch where you can go out and maybe you can walk away with a phone number from this, but that's not the point. The point is actually to deal with your fear of rejection. And that elevator pitch is, hey, I saw you. I had to risk embarrassing the heck out of myself to meet you. I'm actually super late for a meeting. It looks like you're busy too. How about this? Give me your number. If you don't like me, give me a fake one.
There you go.
And that's it, right?
Yeah.
You can deliver that.
Isn't the cool thing with that though, like you're disarming the situation by saying like, I'm risking embarrassing myself. So straight away, it's like you're not coming across as egotistical. You're not coming across as like, it's just again how you're approaching the situation. You're completely almost like disarming it. It's almost like me back in the day when I was personal training. So for me, the reason why I was so good at approaching people on the gym floor when I used to do one-to-one stuff was I used to work in a restaurant. So in a restaurant, what do you have to do? You have to go and talk to people. Oh, are you finished with this? How's your meal? Is there anything I can get for you? So again, it breaks that ice. But what I used to do in the gym was, again, you talk about blogs, it's quite funny because that's how I started my career, was doing blog articles. So I'd do these blog articles. Nice. And I used to walk on the gym floor because again, you're trying to connect with people. But the problem is every other personal trainer there would almost be harassing people. So my demographic was women. So again, as a male personal trainer approaching women, like straight away, red flags. So I'd walk up to women, I say, sorry to bother you. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm actually writing fitness articles. I was just wondering if there's 2 or 3 things you'd be interested to know about this. If you give me some really good content, I'd put you into a draw and you could actually win some free personal training. So straight away, I'm not trying to sell them anything. Yeah. And it's like, so then I've got 3 content ideas. I've then got their email address, and then potentially they could win some personal training. So it's like straight away, completely disarm the situation. As soon as I got the information, I wouldn't even start a conversation like, oh, thank you very much. Here's the thing if you're interested. Again, give me a couple of weeks. I'll write an article, walk off. And then every time I saw them again, it'd be a head nod or a wave. And then slowly but surely, even if they didn't win the personal training, they're then
building the rapport.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they're like, oh, actually, I remember 3 months ago, you asked me for this. I clearly didn't win the personal training competition, but actually, I'd love to have some personal training with you. So again, it's just real simple, real basic. And you're not going in there for the kill, being like, hi, my name's Daniel. I'd love to personal train you. It's like straight away, it's like you come across, but that's kind of what you're taught to do. It's like, oh yeah, confidence. But this one's taught you about with this end. So what really is confidence? Apart from like this, just doing the inner work on yourself, is there another way of coming across as confident, because you don't want to come across as cocky necessarily or arrogant or anything like that, because that can have the exact opposite effect. So how can you then become confident in these conversations?
So confidence is simply knowing that you can execute something, right? And there's this whole fake it till you make it. And, there's all these kind of ideas about confidence, but you can't be confident until you actually feel like you are going to succeed. And the only way that is going to happen is if you do it enough times to prove it to yourself that you most likely will. The problem with, dating is no matter how good you get, you're always batting below 50%. I don't care who you are. Right. It's like baseball. The best baseball hitters in the world, 300, 400%, or 30% of the time they're on base, 40% of the time. With dating, even if you're Brad Pitt or still the majority of women are not going to say yes to you. Right. And obviously, if you're not Brad Pitt, it's going to be much lower, but it's a numbers game. So for me, as long like to answer your question, it's if you feel prepared and if you've done it enough times to where you have like a reasonable expectation of what success looks like and how to deliver on what you're doing, it's pretty easy to be confident. Like if I give a guy nothing to say, like no sort of coaching, no nothing, I'm just like, go talk to that girl, he's gonna do something probably ridiculous, right? He's either going to like be too scared to do it, or he's going to come across as phony, or he's just going to start asking her, hey, how's it going? Where are you from? What do you do? Just kind of bomb them with interview questions. But if you have some sort of roadmap of where you're going, I feel like that is what most guys need to kind of develop that confidence. And then eventually all those training wheels, all the sort of, back things that say in the back of your mind, like you don't need any of that. You can just walk over and say hi. Depending on the situation, if it's like a bar or something like that. But I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but
yeah, it does. Like I said, it comes to anything. Like the more you get good at something, the more confident you are. Like driving, everyone's confident driving, so they don't enough times to know sort of what to do. I think this is one of the biggest things. It's like it's, as you said, it's just becoming. I think also the confidence in the dating sense is understanding that no one is going to find you attractive 100% of the time. For example, my mum, so you got David Beckham. Like David Beckham was the UK's sexiest man or the world's sexiest man however many times. My mum's like, I hate him. Like all these tattoos he's got. I know I always laugh at my mum and say, well, mum, if David Beckham ever wants a 50-year-old woman with 4 kids, I'm sure he's going to ask your opinion. Like I always laugh and joke with her about that. But it's like, at the end of the day, like she just doesn't find tattoos attractive. So it might just be simply that people can be that superficial, that your hair's the wrong color, or you've got facial hair, or your eyes are the wrong color. It could simply be you're just not that person's type. And no matter how potentially good of a connection you could be, they won't see past that. So that's got nothing to do with you. So just don't take it personally. But as you said, it's that story that we tell ourselves and we take it so personally when simply it's not that at all. It's just you're not specific what they're looking for at that time. Does that make sense? And you also don't know where they are in their life as well. Like they could just have a really bad breakup. They could be their mum could be ill. There's all this sort of stuff going on. It's like, but you take it so personally, and you think it's like, no, you're ugly, you're unattractive, you're always going to be single and a loser. So it's just not that at all. By the way, I've taken so many notes here already about where this conversation could go, because you're dropping a lot of things here where this could go. Because and I absolutely love this. Something I want to draw back on is how attraction works, because I don't think we really understand this. Now, I don't think I understand this. I'm going to be completely honest with this. Like when it comes to dating women, I'm pretty good, but I have never really thought this much into it. It's just trial and error. It's trial and erri've been I kind of like I've been coming on so many dates. I kind of have this formula and it kind of works. Right. But I don't actually think I know the answer to some of these questions I'm going to ask you. Like when it comes to how does attraction work, I'm like, is this like love languages? Because again, I learned about love languages. So that was an interesting thing for me. Like I genuinely have no idea. So for me here, this is bizarre to me. It's like I'm learning the theory behind some of the stuff that I probably do. So can we talk about like how attraction actually works? So I don't think I really know this.
Totally. I mean, it really goes back to evolutionary biology, right? And if you really get into that, there's it's just fascinating how all this stuff works and the dynamics between masculine and feminine energy. But it kind of comes back to what I was talking about before, sexual tension, right? There's a natural sort of tension or polarity between a man and a woman, just based on, what's going on with our with our genitals, I guess, right? And the ability that, you can make it. You don't have that tension between men and men, right? That's why when you, if you're straight, right? If you're not, then you're going to have that tension.
Yeah.
But so it's a combination of that natural sexual tension that's just kind of there, right? And plus status. I think status plays a huge role, and like kind of what you're looking for either as a man or a woman in the future, right? So we're naturally attracted to people based on like their social status, where they kind of fall. And if you're a man of high status and everyone knows you're a man of high status, then every man wants to kind of be you or get to know you, and every woman usually wants to sleep with you. And we're amazingly good at spotting status as a culture, or as a species, really, right? And it's also like hierarchies. Who was it that had an amazing sort of who's the Canadian guy who's older Canadian gentleman, professor, PhD, what is his name? I'm blanking on it, but he was talking about
Is it Jordan Peterson?
Jordan Peterson. Peterson. In his book, it's like the 12 rules for life. The first chapter is on like lobster hierarchy, and I think that's one of the best sort of breakdowns of how attraction works. It's basically dominance hierarchies. So a lot of it has to do with dominance and status, and the other stuff has to do with like I said, sexual tension. And if obviously we can geek out on it and go into the more of the scientific stuff, but in terms of how it works, if you're not running away from sexual tension, if you're comfortable with that feeling of being attracted to a woman and having her be attracted to you, then that's really all you need to be okay under attraction, right? Attraction or love, it's an energy, you could say, right? It's it's literally something we can feel. We can't like we can't measure it yet, but I'm hoping in the future we will be able to, right? So you can feel it. You can feel when a woman's attracted to you. You can feel when you're attracted to a woman, and what you're feeling is that tension, right? And if you run away from the tension, you're not going to get attraction, right? Or you're not going to get a connection. But if you move into it and you know how to kind of dance with that energy, then you are going to potentially make that connection. So it's understanding how to recognize it. So a lot of guys don't know how to recognize if a woman's attracted to them because they're either running from the tension, or they don't know what to look for, or they're just not seeing the obvious signs. And if that's your problem, then there's a decent amount of work to do. But once you've gone on enough dates, or you've been in those situations where you've had enough experience where you can feel that, it becomes a lot easier. Like we mentioned before, where eventually you just kind of know how to dance with these energies, if that makes sense.
I think it's really interesting as well. Like my audience and long-time listeners to the podcast, we talk about energies a lot, like vibrational energy and stuff like that. So my long-time listeners will be very, very aware of that. And I think one of the biggest things for me, like again, listening to you talk, again, this goes for both men and women when they're picking up on this energy, like moving towards it, away from it, is a lot of people aren't aware and mindful of situations that they're in. And I think that's one of the things, when you do this inner work on yourself, whatever that looks like for you, and you become a bit more present and aware of the situation, you will start to notice these energy shifts. And it's not even necessarily, for me, I don't think, when you have that initial interaction, when you're making eye contact, it's even just on the date as well. You can feel the energy shift. You can feel if you're losing the person. You can feel if you're being a bit boring. You can feel if it's going well. You start to notice it, where someone that's not that in tune with themselves, again, they'll start to doubt themselves. Am I losing the conversation? Is she interested? Is she not? And it's like you then get inside your own head again. Whereas if you're very present and able to read the room, it makes it a lot easier. I want to again so much.
And what you said is spot on. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the other piece that I also want to talk about is presence. Right? Presence is everything. So, and like you said, if you're not present, if you go into your head and you're disconnecting essentially. And women are like I think women feel presence a little bit better than men. I think it's feminine energy versus masculine energy. Like, you could say men who embody more of a masculine energy are better at kind of like getting stuff done or going from point A to point B. But to do that, sometimes you got to be tunnel vision and lose that presence. So that's always, a very important piece of it.
I think it's also, again, when you're dating as well, it's also the more present you are, you will hear what the person is actually saying, because what that person is actually saying will then give you clues and cues to then follow the conversation on. Whereas if you're so in your own head about, oh my God, I'm losing this person, do they like me or not? They'll stop talking and you'll be like, I haven't got a clue what they just said. Whereas actually, if you're listening and paying attention, again, women pay attention to that because like, wow, this person's actually listening. If you can relay back what they're saying, again, it's that rapport building. Like to actually build that rapport, listening to what the person's saying, understanding the language that they're using, listen to it, and then actually carry on that conversation, talking about what they were saying, but adding a little bit more onto it. It's like just layers of conversation, isn't it? Like the more you talk, you sort of going, and that's kind of how it flows. And again, it's really simple and it's really basic. And again, like a lot of people know this stuff outside of a conversation with a man and a woman. Like if you're talking to your mate, you do the same thing. Your mate talks to you. We were saying this off air, like man to man, normally we use swear words because again, that's kind of what men do. It's like alpha, monkey. It's like you then chatting away, but then like, you say something and then I basically take what you're saying in your language, add my spin on it, throw it back to you. You do the same thing. It's like, okay, it's real simple. Just do the same thing with the opposite sex or again, the same sex if that's what you're into. I just want to loop back a bit here to talk about status because this is a massive one, I think. And I think this is something here that is killing, in my opinion, dating and connection with people. I think that social media and this kind of fake world that we're living in creates this false idea and illusion of status, that people are living the champagne lifestyle on a Budweiser budget. And yes, it's great for short-term fixes, but you know, to actually get someone more long-term and actually to get this person to build a life with, it's never going to work. So I was interested in your opinion on this, about this modern day Instagram, TikTok, influencer, whole genre, because it puts so much unnecessary pressure, I think, on men when it comes to dating. And I then also think it has an influence on women on what they should expect from a man. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it's such a crazy time, especially when it comes to dating, because exactly what you said, like people are primarily sort of interacting with members of the opposite sex more so on Instagram than in real life. And what we're looking at is 99% fake, right? Like show me a beautiful woman who doesn't use a little bit of face tuning or a little bit of doctoring on her photos, and I'll show you someone who's, you know, behind the curve. Like even men, like lots of guys I've interviewed on my podcast recently, they all admit to like, you know, using a little bit of face tuning and tweaking their photos, photoshopping things. Like everyone's doing it. So you're scrolling through Instagram, you know, you're looking at beautiful girl after beautiful girl, but you're not even really looking at real people. You know, it's and the same thing is in reverse. You're looking at, you know, this sort of persona that they've created, and I think it's kind of toxic for dating. Of course, it gets us kind of anchored to things that don't exist, and then, you know, you see everyone else having an amazing time and you're sitting on your phone not having an amazing time, right? So, but just by interacting with this content, you know, they've done studies showing that you're actually making yourself depressed. So, you know, I tell all my clients, like, yes, it's important to have an Instagram, because if you don't have one, they're just going to think you're weird, or they're going to think there's something wrong with you. Yeah, exactly. But to be spending a lot of time on there, or to be using it as a way to, you know, meet people, I think is not a great use of your time whatsoever. I think it's a horrible use of your time. You need to be meeting people in the real world, doing things that you enjoy, meeting people through your social circle, meeting people through the things that you know, enjoy doing, and building that social circle and becoming a person of high status, you know, in your life and within that social circle. And that's how you'll date the highest quality, you know, women, and find your highest quality companion, is through that. If you're trying to use online dating and Instagram, you're going to have a horrible time. It doesn't matter how amazing, good looking you are. Obviously, the better looking you are, the little bit easier it's going to be, because it's such a surface layer sort of looks based thing. But not a single guy I know, regardless of how, you know, like I said, how good looking they are, does well with that strategy. And from the women I've spoken to as well, they agree.
I think this is a big thing for me. Like I am still very much single, but I've very much taken myself off the online dating scene. Like for me, I'm still doing some work on myself, and for me, it's like, if it happens, it happens. But you've hit on a few key things here. Is first of all, art of conversation, which I want to talk to in a second, because again, there isn't art to conversation, so I really want to go down that rabbit hole. But I think one of the key things here is when it comes to standing out from the crowd, there's a lot of keyboard warriors, not just in the dating sense, but in general, people that can talk a good game over text message, and, you know, talk, but they don't back it with any substance. You then put the same person, literally, you could be texting someone for months, you meet them in person, zero conversation skills. It's like, is this the same person? How is this even possible? So to actually be able to meet someone in person and have a conversation, that for me, when it comes to status, I think that sets you in good stead straight away to actually be able to hold a conversation. Because nowadays with the social media and all this stuff, especially kids nowadays, earlier and earlier on iPads and stuff like that, like it's a lost art to actually hold a conversation. So if you can actually do that, it sets you up.
That is literally the hardest skill that I have to teach my clients. Like, you know, they can do all the other stuff first and actually succeed halfway decently. They can get dates, they can, you know, do well on those dates, you know, have some sort of choice in their love life, and but becoming a good conversationalist is not an easy thing to do. Becoming a great conversationalist is one of the hardest things to do when it comes to, because it's, to be a good conversationalist, first you have to have a pretty big breadth of knowledge of many things, right? You got to be kind of plugged in to pop culture. You got to know a decent amount of history, because if you don't know certain things, you're just going to look like an idiot, right? There's a lot of red flags that you could fall into. There's a lot of, you know, horrible things you can do in conversation, like bragging or name dropping or overdoing certain things that will immediately kind of be like red flags to you know, high quality people. And they're like, this guy's like a name dropping, you know, a subtle bragger. Like I've had enough of that person. Right. And it's a tough skill to learn, because you can't fake it. Right. I don't know a single good conversationalist out there who's also not like an interesting, cool person that, you know, I would want to have in my life in some way, shape, or form. And to be a good conversationalist, like I said, it takes a lot of those things, but it also takes the occasional person pointing out to you why you might be a bad conversationalist. And that's really something that is very difficult, because most people in your life will not tell you the annoying things you do in conversation, or the annoying things about you when, you know, just like being your friend or you know, or like dating you. Like you could ask ex-girlfriends, but you never know. That advice could be very, you know, loaded with other reasons why, you know, maybe it didn't work out. But that's one of the most valuable things that I found during my journey was having other men and women, you know, who were kind of qualified to give me that objective feedback of why I sucked. And the things that I was doing that were breaking connection, that were annoying people. And a lot of the time it was very subtle, but when I stopped doing those things, that was actually way more powerful than, like, you know, having this whatever technique or strategy or thing to talk about. It was really about stopping the bad stuff, more about than like doing good stuff, if that makes sense. Because the thing that makes someone the best conversationalist is really being a good listener. Absolutely. And being able to relate, and to, like you said, to take what someone's saying, be present with that, you know, and, oh, that reminds me of this, or that makes me feel XYZ about it. And having that relation coming back and forth. That's how you feel related to someone. Right. And if you can't listen, you can't do any of that. And you're not listening, you can't hear anything. You're not present. You're missing everything. You're in your head. Right. So, and a lot of these guys who you see as, like, you know, some, like, I even some podcasters I've had on my show, I'm just like, this was the most painful interview ever after it, because it was just this guy who wouldn't shut up. He wouldn't let me get a word in. He was just rambling on, and it was like clearly just, you know, he's kind of going through his script of what he was going to say. And I just left feeling like, you know, feeling used, like feeling like, you know, conversationally raped almost. It was like a horrible experience.
Honestly, because Mikey does a podcast also. Mikey's laughing in the background. I know exactly what it's like. And it's interesting that you're going on this conversation, because, again, like, before I had you on the podcast, I was very unsure on how open you'd be to the direction of this podcast. But as soon as you started talking, I felt instantly that there's that rapport built, that connection. And the more we're talking here, again, we're doing the dance. And when it comes to understanding how you talk, I noticed that when I first started in the podcast, I don't know if you were like this or not. When I first started, I still do it. But at the start, I always used to listen to myself back and critique myself. And what I noticed was I'd interrupt people. But I'd interrupt people because the person I'd be interviewing would say something really profound. And I'd want to say something before I forgot. But actually, what I found is, now again, I noticed that I think I've done it a few times here, but it's different. There's the internet connection where sometimes you jump in, you don't mean to. But most times, but once I've stopped doing that, I'm like, no. I'm just going to fully listen to this person, because that's why I take these notes now. So just a few keywords, and I loop back to it. But it allows me to be so much more present. I'm fully listening to what you're saying, so that it allows the conversation to naturally flow. It's like you knew the outcome roughly of everyone's conversation to go. And then from there, we've just naturally right, let's just have a chat. And that's why I always do Mike, when me and Mikey have conversations, it's literally a case of, Mikey, what's the topic we're going to talk about? Right, cool, let's go. And we just have a flowing conversation. So I think it's just really interesting that when you said that, like the reason why I've been able to do this is because I've listened back to myself and critiqued myself of like, right, that's annoyed me that I've interrupted them, because they were in the middle of, they were going to say something, I've interrupted them, and I never went back to figure out what that was they were going to say. And I've missed a golden nugget they're potentially going to drop. So I think it's fascinating that that's what you should do in everyday life. But I don't think people like to hear the truth.
And like you said, that is one of the biggest benefits of, being a content creator, because you have to listen to yourself. You have to watch your videos. Like for me, listening to my voice on podcasting, the first, I was like, oh my God, I sound like a nasally idiot. And then I'd watch the video and I'm like, oh, I look terrible. And everyone goes through that.
Yep.
And as you said, it's, you pick up on, you get annoyed with yourself, and that's really how right? If there's not someone to actually like point it out to you, but the things that you're annoyed with yourself about, you can imagine other people are probably annoyed too. Mm-hmm. And if you don't watch yourself, if you don't listen to yourself, how would you ever know that? Right. Exactly. Or if you don't have a coach pointing it out. So yeah, insanely valuable. And the other thing too, which, when I was preparing for the interview and listening to a couple of, your prior shows, when I immediately like heard, it was like just past the opening in one of the shows, I was like, wow, this guy's so easy to talk to. Like I immediately got that sense that it would be an easy interview and we would connect. I could just kind of like hear it in your voice, and that I guess like how you're speaking to the other person. It was weird. So I think we develop, well, I say it's weird, but it's actually, I don't think it's weird at all. It's just pattern recognition, right? When you are a good conversationalist and you kind of do this for a living, and you're doing this all the time, you pick up on these sort of like micro tells that people have. And I think, women are naturally, when compared to men, much better conversationalists, because they're doing way more conversation, right? We're growing up playing sports while, doing whatever, maybe coding, while women tend to be a lot more social and having more conversations. So,
and emotionally in tune with themselves as well.
Totally.
Women are a lot more emotionally in tune. And I think that massively plays a role. Whereas men were like, as you said, playing sport, man. Like man feel no emotions, man feel no pain. It's like, okay, you feel something, mate. No. It's like, you do. you go home and you cry. It's fine. It's fine. Just let it out. Whereas women are a lot more emotionally open, which then leads to better conversations, I feel.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Because if that's, a good conversation is just sharing emotions, right? And being willing to to embody those emotions. Because if I'm a nervous wreck and I walk up trying to be confident, what are you gonna see? You're gonna see a nervous wreck, right? So we can pretend like we're hiding our emotions, but they're always just kind of showing like right on our chest. So and yeah, women are a lot more comfortable kind of being in their emotions than I think most guys, which is obviously a product of our culture a bit and whatnot. But yeah, it's always shocking to guys when they get better at this stuff, the feedback, or when, they find themselves connecting with women more, they kind of all say the same thing. They're like, or women, sometimes it's women saying this, but it's the bar is low, right? The other guys out there are usually really bad conversationalists. So the bar is actually pretty low to be decent as a guy, which is great news for guys. And and I think women would agree. So
when was this? I'm terrible with timers. Maybe 6 to 8 months ago, I went on a date. This absolutely beautiful woman. It turns out that she was on. So in the UK, we had this thing called Nuts and Zoo, which is like a pin-up sort of Playboy style, but lesser, like less extreme Playboy thing. She's on the front cover of those magazines. So this is when I was internet dating, I was looking at a bar, I thought she was a catfish. And she was very spiritual and all these sort of things. I'm thinking, how does someone look like this and sort of have all this conversation, have a conversation back and forth over texting? We're going to go over that in a second. And then anyway, met up with her. And I was convinced she wasn't going to show up. Turns out she rocked up 20 minutes late to the date because she was waiting at the wrong car park. So there's me thinking, I've been stood up here. This is some bloke called Barry. I just having a joke with me. Anyway, turns out nuts and zoom model, so this stunning model, blah blah blah. And she didn't tell me any of this stuff beforehand. But when we were having this conversation about this, because I used to do a lot of modeling myself, she literally said that when she was in the height of her modeling, so again, stunning women, always women, she said guys would literally come up to her and say, I have a Lamborghini. That is literally it. Nothing else. And she'd be like, yeah. And he'd be like, no, you didn't hear me. I've got a Lamborghini. And she'd be like, yeah. And she was saying, clearly, the way this guy had come up and said that, he's clearly said that before. And at some level, it has worked. And she was just like, wow, like what level of conversation do you have that is your opening line and you think people are going to somehow like be bowing down to you? It absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard these things before too, and I still like have to shake my head. I'm like, how, like, to get to the point where you can own a Lamborghini, unless you're a trust fund kid and it just was given it to you, like you have to have some success in life to have a Lamborghini, or at least to keep it. Yep. So to think that would work, you got to be so far gone socially. Like you just have to be completely like in a different universe, or just, you know, whichever women that works on are just so like, who the hell is that working on? That yeah.
So let's go back on this then, like, because we mentioned before about texting as well. So I know for me that whenever, again, I don't know if you're the expert on this, but whenever I'm texting someone new on a dating website, this is especially relevant when I was doing my modeling. I was petrified that people would think I was a catfish. And I was also worried that they'd be a catfish. So I would always do videos, completely unfiltered, like when I've just woken up, just videos, so people could see a bit more of my mannerisms, interactions. And then whenever I met them on a date, they're like, oh, it feels like I've known you for ages. I'd also use voice notes, stuff like that. Would you say that's something that is good for building rapport with people you've just met? Like, what is the common thing when it comes to texting and attraction now? Because that is the way that things are going. It's not necessarily a phone call anymore. It is literally all done over WhatsApp or Snapchat or Instagram. Like, what can, again, I know this is mainly for guys, this conversation, but what can guys and women sort of do when it comes to this whole texting game thing now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that about voice notes and like on Telegram, for example, if you ever use that app, you can send the little videos even. They're like tiny little, like, it's almost like a text, but it's a video. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like where these sort of apps are going and how the, you know, because basically to answer your question, right? First, there's some fundamental things about electronic communication that will be helpful to know. But to answer your question on should you use video or should you use voice or text or whatever, it's kind of like creating content. I heard once in the day, like some people are going to be better on podcasts. Some people are going to be better on video. Some people are better at writing, right? So whatever you feel the most confident in is probably where you're going to shine. Like if you're just hilarious and great at just like, you know, banging out funny, witty text, like if you're better in text, then you can, you know, have that kind of be like your go-to. But if you have a great voice and women compliment your voice, like you have a very good masculine deep voice. So I guarantee like women often tell you like,
make me blush.
Like how often do women say, I love your voice, right? Like,
but isn't it funny? I hated my voice. Joe, like you mentioned when you first started, when I listened back to my podcast, when I very first started, it was just audio. I absolutely hated it. I hated my voice. But as you said, the more you get into it, people are like, oh, you've got a really good podcast voice. Like, it's like saying you got face for radio. I was like, oh, cheers.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, if you consistently have women saying, oh, I like your voice, that's a pretty good sign that you should use more voice notes. And if you're confident when you're, you know, talking into the phone and using that and you feel like you're having fun with it, or if you like sending little videos and that's a good medium for you, that can work too. The main thing, the way that most guys screw up texting is, you know, they meet a girl that they really like, and then they over communicate and they kill all the mystery. They kill all the intrigue. They're too available and they kind of go into chase mode where they're trying to connect too hard over this electronic format, which it doesn't prescribe well to having like a meaningful, deep conversation. Right. Mm-hmm. It's good for exchanging a laugh back and forth. It's good for planning logistics, but electronic communication is not great for connecting. You want to do that face to face, or if you jump on a phone call, it's a lot better to have that. Like you could have it you could jump on a phone and have a good conversation with someone if you're confident over the phone and she's the type of person that likes to jump on a call, especially like if you're, you're worried about getting catfished, you would definitely want to do that.
Or you got like FaceTime now as well, which makes it even easier.
Of course, exactly. Yeah, video call, Zoom, that sort of thing, right? But the main thing is to just what the biggest mistake, like I said, is most guys over communicate and they use texting for doing things. They try to build rapport through texting when it should really just be for attraction and getting a meeting, getting a date, hanging out. Like that's the point. The point is to see the person, in the flesh, not have a long conversation over text, because that doesn't really get you anywhere. If you talk to women, they probably have a million guys in their phone that they've had these conversations with, and they've never actually gone out on a date with them. Because when push comes to shove, they're like, this guy's texting me all the time. Like, he seems really available. Do I really want to meet him, or should I go and like have drinks with my girlfriend? I think I'm gonna flake, have drinks with the girlfriend. So that's really the biggest thing. Like I said, is guys will communicate too much. They'll start asking questions like, how's your day, before you've even like hooked up. Like, asking someone like, how are you doing over text, like it's usually an annoying question to get, right? Like, because you're just forced to be like, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. Like, there's obviously some level of small talk where that's normal in a conversation. Like, if I walk, if we meet in person, hey, what's up, man, how's it going? Like, that's normal. But if I text you out of the blue, like, hey, how are you? You're forced to then respond with this, what do you call it? Small talk, which isn't nearly as powerful as just, bringing up some callback humor about something we laughed about in the past, or, sending a funny voice note or a meme or something that generates some sort of value and fun content, reminds you why you're an interesting person, why you should see that person again.
So let's go a bit deeper into this then, because where is the balance? Because obviously you don't, what's that saying? Out of sight, out of mind. Right. So again, that's a saying that's relevant to a lot of things. So a lot of guys, and again, I think women are also the same. I think, like, I know we're specifically talking about men, but I think also women are the same with this. Is you're thinking, well, if they're not talking to me, they're going to be talking to someone else, which then means they're not going to pay attention to me, which then means I'm not going to go on a date with me, blah, blah, blah. And also from a guy's point of view, so I've got a lot of women friends, they're basically turn around and say like, well, the guy didn't seem that interested in me. So where is the fine balance between striking this conversation where it's not too much, but then you're not coming across as too available? Does that make sense? Like, where's that fine balance? Totally. Where's that line?
Yeah. So the skill that you would want to get good at for this is mirroring, right? And to be a good mirror, you have to obviously have an idea of what the other person's giving to you, so you can then mirror that back, right? And as the man, I think it's your job to kind of move things forward, at least take the lead, because that's kind of the more masculine energy. So let's just take a simple situation. Let's say you meet a girl on an online dating site, right? Tinder, whatever, going back and forth. You switch to text, WhatsApp, and if you're going back and forth and you've had probably like 7 to 8, maybe 10 to 15 back and forth, whether that's messages or voice notes or whatever, and you still haven't, gotten a date or planned a date, you're probably over communicating. Like there's only so much you can kind of shoot the shit about, right? So better off to, if it hasn't turned into a date by that point, you're probably wasting your time. Right. So there's that kind of that, I call it like the 7 to 15 message territory, right? If you still haven't gotten a date and you've been communicating for like a couple of days, like I said, you're probably wasting your time. But the main thing is to look for like, are they also doing the conversational like lifting? If you feel like you're driving the conversation, you are driving the conversation, right? If you're asking them questions, they're responding one-word answers, or, you're asking them when they're free and they're not responding to that. And they're just like sending you a cat meme or something like that. Like you got to know, you have to be in tune with what they're giving back to you. And the easiest way to tell is you just do the bubble test, right? So like you pull up any conversation on your phone and you just look like who's communicating more, right? And if it's obviously really one-sided, then that person's more invested, and that person's probably, looking to get the date more than you are. So if it's not equal, you're in trouble. And if it's too heavily weighted on your side, you're in even more trouble. So you can kind of do the bubble test. There's that 7 to 15, message for the first date sort of thing. But what I really want to talk about is Instagram solves a lot of this, because the beauty of Instagram is if you exchange, if the person follows you and you follow them back, you don't have to actively message them because they can watch your stories. And if you're single and you're doing cool stuff, it's a huge benefit to your dating life to post interesting stories and content, because women who are interested in you are going to like all your content. They're going to comment on it. And it's going to be so obvious who likes you and who doesn't. Like, that's the easiest way to tell. If you're a guy, you're single, and you want to see who likes you, just see who's consistently interacting with your Instagram content. If they are, very good chance that they're into you. If they're not, they're probably not. I think that's the best way to tell. And it allows you to also like have this, like you said, out of sight, out of mind. If you're always coming up on their feed and they're always coming up on yours, you're staying top of mind without actually doing anything to message them.
Yep.
So it allows you to kind of play it a little bit cooler and to not go into chase mode.
Robbie, this conversation has been absolutely awesome. Like, genuinely, I have had a great time with this. But I want to just finish off, like, just looping back to something, because I think I've been doing my audience just disservice if I didn't go back to this, because I think I skipped a step. Like, when I say skipped a step, like, went straight into the art of conversation in texting. I mentioned this earlier on. I want to talk about the actual art of conversation in person. And I think I've heard you about this before, that there's almost like a structure to conversation. So again, as you sort of said before, if you're a good conversationalist, this will become really easy to do. Like, it's just a natural conversation. It will flow. It'll be easy. Being a good listener. So we've kind of hit on a few key things here, but I kind of just want to summarize and finish with this. Let's say a guy's listening to this, or even a woman's listening to this, and they aren't good at conversations. What makes a good conversation? Is there sort of a bit of a structure that you've alluded to before that people can sort of follow and listen out for when it comes to actual conversations in person?
Yeah, well, so just to kind of break down how most conversations go, it's usually what I call question filler, right? So I ask a question or I make a statement, and then you respond with some sort of either a question back or filler about that thing, right? And depending on how much you resonate with that question or that topic, I'm going to be able to read that emotionally off you, right? If you lean forward in your chair and your eyes, you're like, oh, this is a good sort of conversational thing. I call that wide rapport, where you're talking about a lot of different topics, right? If I bring up golf and you immediately lean in, I'm like, oh, he must be a golfer. Cool. We can talk about golf, right? And then I might start talking about courses, and that'll be interesting because you like golf, right? But if I talk about, chess, and you kind of, your eyes glaze over, then I better know, like, don't stay in chess because there's no emotion there for you, right? So you're kind of going back and forth with question filler. If the other person isn't providing any filler or not asking any questions, that's a very bad sign, of course, because you can't, for a conversation to be good, you need two people like actively engaging in it. Like, trying to do all the conversation heavy lifting yourself is impossible. Yep. You can't have a conversation with a wall, right? You can't have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk to you. I don't care how good you are, because they're not going to hear anything you're saying, right? So that's kind of like, I call that wide rapport, where you're searching around for things that kind of pique the other person's emotions. And then when you find that, you go deep, and you're going to just kind of go down these rabbit holes, and who knows where you'll end up, right? Yep. And the deeper you go, the more you kind of go into that like bubble where you're just present, and time kind of feels like it's passing effortlessly, and you don't even know like where you are or what you're doing. It's just like you're in this zone, and that's really where you want to be. Like, if you're in that zone, that's like, that's I think it's one of the best feelings in the world, is to be like engaged and connecting with someone, and in that energy, you could say. And if you feel like, one thing I tell guys and women too, like, if you feel like you need to change the energy or the vibe of a conversation, the best way to do that is actually change where you are, not try to talk about something else. So literally, like, go somewhere else, like suggest to go for a little walk or grab a drink over here. Like, I'm a big fan on dates of lots of moving, going from place to place to place to place, versus sitting at a long fancy dinner and trying to have a deep conversation. Because what will end up happening is you'll get interrupted by the wait staff, and it's going to be a barrier to actually going deep and getting to know someone. And a lot of the time, the best way to get to know someone is just to see how they're interacting in the real world. Yeah. Right. See how they're like, moving around and dealing with things that are getting thrown at them. So if you're not doing that on dates, if you're just kind of doing this boring static thing, you're not going to feel like you really got to know someone, and it's going to be way harder to connect. So those are just kind of like the pillars to look for You know,
My-
what
my-
makes
my-
a good conversation?
My best things when it comes to dating, as I always say to people that ever ask me this, is just go on walks. I think walks are the most
best.
underrated dates because there's such diversity with it. Because if you're enjoying the conversation, you can then grab a coffee, or you can then go for some food. Like you can sit there, or if the conversation's dead, there's no interaction, like it's just awful, you can make your excuses and leave. But you've still got some exercise and you're in the fresh air. And for me, it's like I always say to people, the worst kind of dates you can go on, this is my opinion on this, is anything that involves alcohol, because you're not getting the real version of that person. But for me, you can't fake walking, because it's just you're just naturally talking and you get to see that person in a natural state. Can they actually hold the conversation in a normal environment that doesn't involve alcohol and lowering their inhibitions and stuff like that? And I think it's really interesting you said this about again, being engaged, feeling in the zone and the energy, and no better feeling. This is what this conversation has been like for me. And I love podcasts like this, but I hate it when I have to clock watch, because I'm always cautious of the person's time. So for me, it's like, I've set this time slot, but this is one of those conversations where I genuinely feel like we could have gone on forever, because the value that you've given to my audience today, like I said to you before, the main demographic of my audience is women. And I know that your main demographic is men, but I thought it was a really good conversation to be had here, because what we've discussed here, it's good for the other side to see how the other side thinks, if that makes sense. And totally. I think you've given some absolute golden nuggets here. And again, it's been a fascinating conversation for me, and it's answered a few questions for me as well as to why I do kind of what I do, if that makes sense in a weird way. Where can people find out more about you? Because like I mentioned in the intro, you do have a podcast. So where can people find out more information about you, and where can people connect with you?
If you just go over to my site, that's innerconfidence.com. You'll find my podcast kind of front and center there. It's called the Leverage Podcast, and I've got a bunch of different things I offer there. If you're interested in getting better at texting, it's a really easy thing to get better at, and if you're really bad at that, it's a really huge thing that's blocking your success. So, any guy who doesn't feel like that's just easy, I'd recommend grabbing the texting guide I offer. It's inexpensive and it'll make a huge difference. And if you like the episode, please come check out my podcast. I'd love to have you on as a guest on my show at some point too, because
absolutely.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, the time's totally flown by for me. So it'd be it'd be great to have you on there.
No, mate, absolutely, that'd be incredible. I love conversations like this. Like I said, it genuinely is where I connect with someone. It's like I've now got a new person to add to my contact list. If that makes sense, because you know what it's like when you do podcasts, and you do the podcast, and it's a great podcast, but you don't really get that connection. Where genuinely, I've been talking to you even before we started this. I'm like, this guy's on my level here. I like this guy. Like, we're gonna have a good conversation. And for me, I think you get this as well, where someone comes onto your podcast and their genuine goal is to add value to your audience. That means a lot. So for me, like, you've come on here, you've provided so much value to my audience, and that means a lot to me. So I just want to say thank you, like from me to you. Like, it's been absolutely awesome, and the time has flown by. And I know this will not be the last time that we connect.
Yeah, man, the pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're welcome. Take care.